Hello and welcome to Greenbytes Wednesdays. Greenbytes Wednesdays is a podcast series where we facilitate critical conversations and steer consciousness when it comes to understanding the impact of our digital footprint across Nigeria's technology ecosystem. We hope that with this advanced knowledge, we can introduce you to some tools, trends, and best practices that can enhance your knowledge about digital sustainability. Are you curious about climate change? Are you a tech enthusiast or a climate entrepreneur? Come on board and learn on this episode as we get on with every conversation of the Greenbytes Wednesday podcast series. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, funded by the UK government through the Digital Access Program. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote and I am glad to be your host. Welcome on board. When we talk about net zero economy, most times we connect this with environmental issues, we connect it with social issues, humanitarian issues, but rarely do we make the very strong connection with businesses, especially for businesses that are yet to be born or that are at the growing stage. And that's going to be the focus of the conversation today. Welcome to Greenbytes Wednesdays. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. I am your host, and it's really exciting to bring you this conversation. Greenbytes Wednesday is part of our Scale for Net Zero program, and Scale here is smart climate awareness, learning, and empowerment. And we're very excited to facilitate these Greenbytes conversations. The aim for us is to see that these critical conversations can stir up the consciousness in you, the listener, and help you to understand a lot more when it comes to digital footprint, when it comes to Nigeria's technology ecosystem, and connects it with the issues of sustainability and making our environment more pleasant to live in. There could be no better time for us to have this conversation. My guest today is Faiz Muhammad. Faiz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Faiz is the executive director at Blue Sapphire Hub. It's an enterprise support and educational inclusion organization. And what they do basically is to foster entrepreneurship, especially among young people here in Nigeria. But apart from that, Faiz wears other cap. He's also worked extensively when it comes to addressing the challenges of inclusive education in Nigeria around social change, and he's been facilitating a lot of collaboration and partnership. We always stress the important roles of partnerships when it comes to conversations like this. So I'm really privileged to discuss the topic business opportunities for the ICT sector in a Netzero economy. Welcome once again, Faiz.
Thank you.
I know I introduced yourself, but I may have missed a bit or something interesting. Maybe you just got a degree or an award or something and that you think is important to mention. How would you like to introduce yourself, Faiz?
Once again, Faiz Muhammad. I'm the executive director at Blue Sapphire Hub. I consider myself a champion for inclusive education across the country. I've been working in the intersection of the tech and development ecosystem here in Nigeria for the past 10, going on 11 years now. Having worked in different countries with different international partners, working on inclusive education, working on rural and community development, and building tech ecosystems and entrepreneurship policy across these different countries has really expanded my horizons on the scope of the work that needs to be done within the African continent regarding development and education. I have degrees in both information technology and international development. More than anything, I think, like you rightly mentioned, collaboration is the key to solving most of our developmental challenges.
Great. And I'm very excited for the perspectives and insight that you bring to the conversation today, Faiz. Welcome. So let's start again with, I do not want to take for granted. You and I may understand what it means when we talk about net zero economy and net zero as a concept, but not many of the listeners or those watching right now will. So if you had to introduce, in very simple terms, what is net zero economy?
Put very simply, a net zero economy is an economy that centers around efficiency, green efficiency specifically. The idea that you can create an economic ecosystem that is good for the environment. You can create an economic ecosystem that reduces carbon emissions to the point where the businesses and the ecosystem itself help sustain the environment rather than do harm to it.
Interesting. And it's not so common that we think about greening the ecosystem when we think about ICT, for example.
That's true.
We think of it very independently. Can you bridge these two sectors, the ICT and a green economy?
Well, if you think about it this way, Nigeria's tech and entrepreneurship ecosystem consists of several telecommunication networks, data centers, base stations, and innovation hubs across the country. And each of those is dependent on electricity and the electricity grid across the country to run their businesses. Now, being as the context is Nigeria, they're not solely dependent on the electricity grid because of energy inefficiency, which means they have to supplant what energy they need with diesel generators, with petrol generators, all of which exacerbate carbon emissions across the country. You also think about just the simple size of the sector. Between 2016 and today, the tech ecosystem has expanded exponentially. It started with being only worth a few $100 million sometime in 2011. By 2022, we were looking at a $3 billion ecosystem. Yes. And so once you have that level of investment, whether it's national or international, of course, that means an increased level of activity. An increased level of activity also means an increase in energy consumption, which means an increase in e-waste, an increase in fuel consumption, an increase in carbon emissions. And all of these things are detrimental to the environment in ways that are not immediately apparent to consumers.
Okay, let's as we continue in the conversation, if you just build up on these impacts, you sort of infer that there are impacts. Could you list some of them? You said in ways that are not that are detrimental to the environment, but if you could make a list of some of them.
Well, I think the most common one is e-waste. So when you think of the number of computers and systems that are used either in private organizations or in government organizations, a lot of them are obsolete. They're old, actually. And so they don't spend much more than 2 years in use. And at that point, they're not recycled, they're thrown away. And so when you look at the amount of refuse, and Nigeria has a huge amount of refuse across the country, the amount of refuse that consists of e-waste, ICT systems, everything to do with the paraphernalia or the systems themselves being thrown away and being just left to rot in dumps. It's all over the country. And that increases the amount of waste that we continue to put into the environment to a detrimental standard. Also, when you think about powering these systems, like I said earlier, the unfortunate reality of energy efficiency across this country is that these systems need to be powered mostly by diesel generators or petrol generators. And that means that the fuel emissions and the carbon emissions that are the result of the daily use of these systems on a daily basis contribute to increased greenhouse gases in the environment, and contribute to a decrease in the air quality of major cities, contribute to an overall decrease in the level of energy that we have to consume on a nationwide basis, because so much of it is used for one particular or two particular purposes within the ICT sector. That means that it cannot be further distributed across other sectors of the economy. So all of these are things that, while not immediately apparent to the consumer or the user, they are things that we contribute to on a daily basis.
Interesting. And I understand that the ICT sector alone, and this includes data centers and cloud systems and services. So when you upload on Instagram, when you save something on your Google Cloud, all of these things are kept because some data centers are powering it. And the greenhouse gas emissions from this sector alone is about 4%. you could think it's small, but if we backtrack a little bit, 10 years ago, it was even way minimal. So, and like you said, in the coming years, it means if we don't have conversations like this about how we can green these ecosystems, then we risk having more emissions even from the tech or ICT sectors.
Not just emissions, really, but you look at something like the growth of AI, for example. Very recently, there was a study that came out from the Stanford University where they determined that just using ChatGPT, if you are putting in a 100-word prompt into ChatGPT, you're using somewhere between 25 and 45 liters of water to cool down the conductors for each system.
You have to say that again.
If you are putting in a 100-word prompt into ChatGPT, you are using somewhere between 25 and 45 liters of water to cool down the conductors of the system in order to get the answer that you need. So imagine as AI grows and as it expands, how much water it's going to need simply to cool down these systems. That's water that's taken away from the environment, not just from reservoirs, but from people's use in agriculture, in homes, in offices. And that's a very serious problem that we need to consider moving forward.
And it makes me think about the inequality also, because this is a world where about 2 billion people still lack access to clean water.
Exactly.
Wow. And talking about statistics also, I referenced this in one of the previous episodes, that watching a Netflix movie or watching a movie on Netflix or any other streaming platform for 2 hours is about the same emissions that you'll get if you drive in your car around for 45 minutes. Yeah. And I like this context of also putting 100 prompts on AI, on ChatGPT or any other AI platform, and how that could equate how many liters of water?
25, at minimum 25 liters
Wow.
of water.
Wow. So we've talked a little bit about first you've set the pace and in very well articulated, and I should thank you so much for that, Faiz. But as we move forward with the conversation, can we then sort of open up the mind of the listener to the business opportunities? We've sort of listed some of the problems. You've put some statistics that gives us the fact that something has to be done. And outside of it being an humanitarian issue being discussed at the UN, outside of it being an environmental issues that scientists just the research about, where does the business components come into this conversation?
So I think one of the interesting things about the ICT ecosystem is that it's all about innovation. And when you think about the climate crisis and the things that are needed in order to reach net zero, it requires a lot of innovation. It requires a lot of forward thinking for ways in which we can reduce not just waste, but find solutions, even using ICT, that can bring about a reduction in emissions. So you look at, for example, I know of a startup that is using AI once again to reconfigure electricity grids such that the amount of electricity that is distributed using AI prompts is reduced because of a more efficient structure of distribution using AI models. And that means that the amount of electricity channeled to one particular area is much more efficient, and therefore less energy is being consumed by each sector of the economy. And when you look at opportunities, for example, in the building of more efficient solar panels, or opportunities in simply reducing the cost of operationalization, the truth of the matter is that when you have such high emissions coming from carbon-intensive energy solutions like diesel generators, what that means is the cost of your business becomes much, much higher, right? I'll use the example of our own organization. We decided to go completely off-grid some 2 years ago, and we now use solar panels.
And how's that been going?
I did not actually realize just how useful it's been until very recently, where we were talking with some of our partners. And I don't know if you remember, some 2.5 weeks ago, there was a nationwide blackout.
Absolutely. Two in 1 week.
Yeah, no, this one, I think in the northern part of the country, it lasted for about 2 weeks straight.
Okay.
For about 2 weeks straight. And they were all complaining about how difficult it is to conduct business now because there's no energy. The cost of fuel is so high, and even if they could afford that fuel, um, it's really very hard to be able to supplement that fuel with an existing electricity grid, and now the electricity grid isn't working. I didn't have that problem because hadn't been using generators for a long time, and we're not even dependent on the electricity grid. Um, uh, it was entirely renewable energy from our solar panels, which meant that we had a lot more money that we could channel into our programs. We had a lot more money that we could pay staff. We had a lot more money where we could upgrade our systems. And I think these are the things that don't really occur to a lot of businesses when they are thinking about their operationalization. If you have systems that are geared towards efficiency, that are geared towards environmental safety, you are automatically reducing the cost of doing business
Over a long period.
over a long period of time. So something that might have cost you, let's say, just for example, ₦1 million over a month, now costs you less than 300,000 simply because you're using much more efficient energy channels.
And I think it's this short-sightedness that people really struggle with. They think, oh, it's so much to install a solar panel. It's going to cost me about 10 million and I'm operating on a very lean budget. And they think I would rather put some fuel in the generator, and then the fuel prices increases and they struggle a lot. So I agree with you that over a long period of time, it is more efficient. Of course, it is better for the environment. And with innovations and more research, it means we have the opportunity to even lessen the cost of installing more efficient or green systems. You made an example of the work that, the approach of your organization, Blue Sapphire. You also talked about some other innovation that is trying to reduce the within the AI sector and what that means for the environment. Are there other innovations that comes to mind when you think about the ICT sector or ICT sector that is sort of in favor or sort of driving us towards a net zero economy?
Right. So we still have the problem of e-waste with this example, but I do think it's still very useful. One of the principles of a circular economy is having recyclable, durable materials when creating your products. And so I'll use the example of mobile phones and smartphones. Not too long ago, your options for a quality product were either you're going to buy a Samsung or you're going to buy an iPhone. Over the past 5 years, you've seen an explosion in the variety of smartphones that are on the market. Xiaomi is doing very well now. Even smartphone vendors that are locally known, like Tecno and Camnon, are doing very well with very high-end models. Now, what you see with those models is that they're much more durable, they're much more energy efficient, and which means that now people are buying one phone or one laptop or one device and using that for 5, 6, 7 years. Versus a time not too long ago when you'd be using 3 devices in a 3-year period, or you'd be using 5 devices in a 2-year period simply because they weren't durable enough. Immediately that reduces the amount of e-waste that is being produced because people are able not just to buy a much more efficient handset, a much more efficient device that they can use over a period of time, but also those devices are much more easily repaired. So you're not spending money onto a new device, which also means that corporations aren't spending resources on newer devices that are harmful to the environment, because they're having to extract very precious materials from the environment in order to create them. They're now looking at, how do I elongate the life cycle of this device? How do I make it much more efficient so that my user is thinking about software instead of hardware?
Interesting. Now, the next question is going to be a 2-part question. I wouldn't tell you what a part B will be first, but the main question is this. If you just imagine you're sitting right opposite someone or someone on the other side of this conversation, watching or listening, has been thinking a lot about going into business And this is someone who has the skills when it comes to ICT,
Right.
has been very interested in conversations around net zero and environmental sustainability. And this person wants to go into business. What advice would you give to this person?
So I think first and foremost, you have to think of two things. First is, how am I going to make my business sustainable over a long period of time? You need to think about energy costs. Now, that means that your initial expenses are going to be very high, because even if you were going to, let's just use today's figures. If I were going to if I were going to buy an inverter somewhere in Lagos, and let's say it's a Siemens battery, 3.3 kilowatts. I'm going to be spending anywhere between 3 and 4 million just for like a 2-bedroom apartment or a two-room office. Now, you're going to look at that and think that is way too high. That is way too high. I don't think that I have enough to spend that much and then still run the business. Actually, the truth is, if you spend that money now, you're going to be running your business much more efficiently for the next 10 years without thinking about the energy costs.
10 years. Are you sure about that? I think the warranty period is around 5 years.
And no, warranty is about 5 years, but the savings you've accrued in terms of the fuel that you're not spending, in terms of the repair that you're not doing,
In terms of the stability of
the
the business
stability,
also, yeah.
you're thinking about a 10-year time span now. Okay. So I think first and foremost, that needs to be the conversation. How am I going to make that business sustainable on an energy basis? The second thing is, when it comes to the design of your products, you have to think about, how do I incorporate circular economy principles into my product? For two reasons. The first one being that on the international stage now, and that is where you want to make most of your profit. On the international stage now, there is a market for, and there is an investor focus on, eco-friendly, eco-labeled, green certificate devices that are products, are not devices, that are known as being energy efficient, or at least created in such a way that takes into consideration their local environment. And investors are much more ready to invest in these because they see them as a less of a risk. The second one is your customers themselves. Customers have become much more aware of the reality of environmental degradation, and they're looking to find products or startups or services that are taking into consideration these realities. So if you can have a combination of this, an energy efficient business model that includes not just your energy needs, but also your product life cycle, what you end up having is a business that has a good reputation, a business that is long-term, a business that your customers trust, simply because you made the decision on the initial stage to incorporate green efficiency into your business.
This is very golden advice. And you talk about the role of awareness and how many more people are getting more conversant with environmental issues. And this is why we also have conversations like this, like the Greenbytes Wednesday, where we facilitate critical conversations and reflective consciousness. And for us, the aim is that we can impact the digital footprint or the digital landscape in Nigeria, advance some knowledge, make available or make known to you tools and trends when it comes to the digital ecosystem. So back to you, Faiz. Thank you very much. I imagine myself on the other side of this conversation, and I can just nod my head and take notes and feel, yes, I'm ready to go. I have what it takes. But can you also tell us, what are some risks that people have to think about? A young guy out there who's has the skills when it comes to the ICT sector, who understands or is having knowledge about environmental issues, and wants to go into business. What are some risks that you think he or she should keep in mind?
Okay, so the number one risk, obviously, I think like we've spoken before, is operationalization. The cost of running your business, even if it's an energy efficient business, is going to be high. And that means one of two things. Either you already have high capital, which you're going to invest into the energy efficiency aspect of your business, or you're going to borrow in order to do it. Now, it's very important that if you're going to take that route, you do it in such a way that you're not overburdening yourself in terms of starting off or operating a system that's going to be much more expensive down the road for you to pay for. The other thing that you need to consider is where particularly are you starting your business? Here in Nigeria, there are certain states that have particular regulations when it comes to the environment. I'll give you the example of Kano State, for example, where there is a regulation, a state-run regulation, where if you are going to construct, if you're going to do construction anywhere, whether that's in your office space or a new building, or this is specifically for corporate entities. And if there's a tree in that location, in order for you to be able to cut down that tree and build what you want to build, you have to build 5 more. You have to plant 5 more trees.
So this is operational in Kano States today.
You have to build 5 more trees. That is the law, right? So you want to be very careful not to run afoul of those kind of regulations. There are already penalties that exist there are penalties for foregoing these sort of environmental regulations, and you want to be aware of them so that you don't run afoul of the government. You also want to be aware of the risk of, shall we say, the risk of not fully understanding the market itself. That is, your consumers want quality products. They want quality services. Now, if it does turn out that in order for you to provide them with quality services, quality products, you are doing harm to the environment over a long period of time, significant harm to the environment, eventually what you're going to find is you're going to start losing customers. Because the harm to the environment is something that, while initially seems like an invisible factor, over a long period of time, people start to notice it. People start to notice just how detrimental this is. I'll give the example of Port Harcourt over the past 3 years. When you look at the depletion in air quality that has happened simply because of the amount of emissions that are in the air, right? Initially, the thought process is business is good, things are going well, money is coming into the city, nobody's complaining about it. But eventually, the suit is so heavy that you can basically brush it off of your skin. It's so heavy that you can feel it in your lungs when you're breathing. Now your quality of life is affected. Now the amount of time you can spend out of home is affected. Now your children's well-being is affected. And suddenly people are thinking, I don't need this kind of business around. I don't need this in my environment, because it's not just detrimental to the environment, it's detrimental to me. And so those are things that you have to take into consideration when building, especially in the ICT sector. When you consider the fact that the tech ecosystem is one of the most visible job creators, one of the most visible systems that currently exist in Nigeria today, there are more investor eyes, and investors are very keyed into ESG, which is environmental social governance these days. So you might start a business, but it doesn't take ESG principles into account. Immediately to an investor, that says, this is a risky venture. Red flags. This is something that I cannot put too much money into because it might fold within a little bit of time, simply because they haven't thought of sustainability. So these are risks that you need to take into account starting a business.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Faiz Muhammad. He's the executive director of Blue Sapphire Hub, and we've been having conversations around business opportunities for the ICT sector in a net zero economy. I've learned quite a lot myself, and I hope that you, the listener, have also learned quite a lot. Faiz, we've been speaking now for a few minutes, and I want to, if you could wrap this up, what is one thing that you think the listener should go with? But just before you do that, I just want to reflect on a point you made where you talked about Port Harcourt and the suits. Last week at COP, the United Nations Conference of Parties,
Right.
that took place at Baku in Azerbaijan, the Director General of the Nigerian Climate Change Council, Climate Change Council, NCCC, she was speaking at an event, and she talked about how she painfully had to relocate some of our family members from Port Harcourt because the suit is real, and that's the black carbon or black suit. Feel free to Google it, read more about it, and you'll see that these things we're talking about are not just, ideas. They are real issues, and we really need to take action. So if you had to sum up this conversation, Faiz, how will you do that?
Well, I think there are three things to take into account. Number one is that the tech ecosystem, while being a very important driver of the economy, and while it can provide solutions for the green and circular economy, is also energy intensive. And that is something that needs to be taken into account when you're starting your business. As the ecosystem is growing, we need to find solutions that make the entire ecosystem more sustainable for the environment. The second thing is consumers are very, very aware of these realities now. Some of them will choose a product that is more eco-friendly. And so it's important for you to take those into account when starting your business or when operationalizing at all in the tech ecosystem. The third thing is that ESG is important. Environment and social governance is something that investors, corporations, and governments are taking into account very seriously. And you have to create your business or mold your business in such a way that it's taking into account these very important factors, not simply for the health of your business moving forward, but for the health of the environment in general. I think the big takeaway for the example that we used in Port Harcourt is that when it comes to the environment, business and the environment, the business might affect a certain number of people. The environment affects all people. So it's something that we need to pay attention to, regardless of how well the ecosystem functions. We could only measure its success by how little damage it's doing to the environment.
Interesting. I just want to echo that again. The business, no matter how good or big that business is, affects just a few people. But the impact on the environment affects the 8 billion people across the world, one way or the other. And that's really, really profound. Thank you so much for the insight, Faiz. It's been a very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. I could continue speaking with you for the next couple of hours, but we have to call it a wrap at this point. And the Greenbytes Wednesday podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts, on Spotify, iTunes, on YouTube, also SoundCloud, all podcast streaming platform. You can find the Greenbytes Wednesday there. I want to say a very big thank you to my team. Wonderful, who's been directing and coordinating all of these, to Ayo and to Ajibola. Also, big thanks to Prince Gideon, who's been facilitating this. And it's really been a pleasure coordinating this conversation. If you've learned a thing or two, feel free to share the link with people in your contact, with your social media, and check out other episodes of Greenbytes Wednesday. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and it's been a pleasure being your host. Till the next time.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Greenbytes Wednesday. This podcast is brought to you by Area I under the SCALE initiative, thanks to funding from the UK government through the Digital Access Program. Have you learned something new? Please share with your network, share with your friends, as I look forward to hosting you on yet another episode of Greenbytes Wednesday next week. Follow us on our social media platforms, check out our courses, test yourself, see how much you know, how much you're learning when it comes to digital and sustainability ecosystem in Nigeria. And I should remind you that as you balance your knowledge of digital ecosystem, also remember to stay committed to a shared and sustainable planet. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. Bye for now.